At first, it was small. A few messages left unanswered, a canceled lunch, or a missed weekend. I would smile, pretend I didn't notice, and convince myself that I was being supportive. Everyone around me would say, "He's a hard worker. He'll make it up to you." But inside, a quiet voice whispered that I deserved more than crumbs. I would brush it off, blaming myself for expecting too much. I had learned, somewhere along the way, to keep my desire muted, to keep my disappointment tucked behind polite smiles. Then came the loneliness, not the kind that wakes you in the middle of the night crying into a pillow, but the subtle, creeping kind that wraps itself around your routines and habits. I noticed the silence in the apartment. I noticed the quiet dinners, the empty evenings. I noticed how his eyes, when they did meet mine, were tired but never searching. And I realized that my patience had become invisible to him. My understanding had become invisible. My presence was no longer enough. It wasn't that he didn't care. I don't think he had ever stopped caring. But care had been diluted by exhaustion, by distraction, by the 1,000 tiny responsibilities that filled his days. I had tried to exist beside him without claiming too much attention, without demanding too much energy. And in doing so, I had created a vacuum, a space he didn't fill, but that was also empty enough to let someone else slip in. The first time it happened, I didn't even know it was a start. I met him at a mutual friend's gathering, a man with a soft smile and a quiet confidence that immediately drew me in. We talked, laughed, and I felt a spark I hadn't felt in months. I justified it at the time. "It's harmless," I told myself. "I'm just talking. I'm just being human." And it was true in a way. I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was thinking about connection, about being seen in a way I hadn't been for a long time. But then the conversations grew longer. The messages came faster. The moments became more intimate. I found myself laughing in ways I hadn't in months. I found myself sharing stories, confiding fears, feeling noticed and important. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space I had given my boyfriend had been filled, not by neglect, but by someone who paid attention in the ways that mattered most. A month turned into 3, 3 into 6, and 6 into a year. A year where I had managed to create a secret life parallel to my main life, a life that gave me what I craved: validation, attention, the feeling of being wanted. Every time I rationalized it to myself, I repeated the mantra that it didn't hurt anyone, that he was too busy to notice, that he had given me space to breathe. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was playing a dangerous game, and the longer I played it, the closer I edged to a point of no return. I remember one afternoon, a warm Saturday, when the sky was impossibly blue and the world felt like it belonged entirely to me. He called to say he would be late. Another meeting, another deadline, another reason to miss lunch. I smiled, told him I understood, and hung up. Then I checked my phone. The man from the other life had sent a message asking if I was free. And for the first time, I hesitated. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, a weight I could no longer ignore. Yet when I met him later that day, the laughter came easily, the conversation flowed, and the warmth returned. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt beside my boyfriend in months. I began to notice patterns in myself that I couldn't ignore. The excitement of hiding, the thrill of secrecy, the sense of control over a life that had felt increasingly stagnant. I knew it was wrong, and that knowledge made it feel even more intoxicating. Every glance I shared, every whispered word, every stolen hour felt like a rebellion against the boredom, against the neglect, against a life I had allowed to become predictable. I had convinced myself that it was temporary, that I would stop, that I would find a way back. But time has a way of stretching indefinitely when you let it. Then came the day when I realized something I hadn't anticipated. He knew, not in a text, not in a confrontation, but in the way he moved around me, in the way his eyes didn't meet mine, in the careful neutrality in his voice. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. But the more I tried to maintain my usual energy, the more the distance grew. He was still there, physically, still answering questions, still making the motions of relationship. But he had erected walls I couldn't scale, invisible barriers built from knowledge I hadn't admitted even to myself. I tried to confront him. I tried to ask if he knew, but the words would catch in my throat. How do you ask someone if they've discovered a truth you've hidden for a year? How do you admit that you've spent months living a parallel life, that the love you had promised and the patience you preached have been replaced by something impulsive, something dangerous? And yet, I couldn't stop myself from watching him, from noticing how carefully he now avoided certain topics, how he no longer lingered when he left the room, how his touch, once so natural, had become measured, minimal, deliberate. It was in those quiet moments, alone in the apartment, that I began to understand the gravity of what I had done. I had created an illusion for both of us. For him, a relationship that was incomplete, a partner who was supposedly patient and understanding. For myself, a life that seemed thrilling but was rooted in betrayal. And the paradox of it all, the rush, the excitement, the sense of being alive, was entwined with shame, guilt, and the knowledge that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. I began to see his absence not as a flaw in him, but as a reflection of my own choices. I had given him space, yes, but I had filled it with deception. I had justified it to myself as harmless, but it had consequences. I could feel in the way he now pretended not to know me, in the deliberate distance, in the polite but cold exchanges. Every word, every gesture, every glance carried a weight I hadn't fully anticipated. The universe had a way of making sure that actions, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually leave their mark.